Julian and Lee.
Chartered accountant and someone who was fortunate enough to be in the audience and played in Ennis, Emily, about 5-6 years ago when you spoke, you predicted the demise of the Celtic Tiger very well. The question really is, to compare to, is the legal system, does it help or does it hinder? Something I mentioned, John, with John's mission before you leave, there's a conference in a fortnight in Dublin called Does Integrity Matter? With the board of the European Business Ethics Network in 15 countries, just getting going in the 16th Ireland, and we have a big conference with 80 speakers from 32 countries and 5 continents, including John, on a Friday morning session on corruption and whistleblowing. We'll try that again with John's permission, and John will be speaking at us. So the question really is, does the legal system help or hinder?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to express a view on the legal system. You know, at the end of the day, there are lots of examples where we can look at legislation which people have called for to provide better protections, and it has been slow to come in. I remember, 20 years ago at the time, there was a review on the position in relation to fraud, generally by the Law Reform Commission. There were a whole series of recommendations identified which took quite some time to come through. I think, to be perfectly honest, what you're putting your finger on is a question of what society is prepared to accept. And there comes a time, I shared the platform with Paul Appleby there last year, and somebody asked the question very bluntly, why aren't more people in jail? And just as the Minister said earlier on, we have a system of natural justice, we have due process, things take time and so on, and that's what we have to follow through on. My comment on it was, well, look, if there is a collective will from society, we'll figure it out and we'll get the reform and the changes that we need. So we can blame the system or the law, or we can make our voices heard and get our Parliament to make the changes necessary.
I think I'm not a lawyer either, but I think it does go back to something that was cued by your question in relation to the culture, and the legal system is part of that culture. And I think for our own political and social and cultural reasons, Ireland has always been a sort of a cold place for the whistleblower or the informer. And I think there is still that hangover of that particular era over it. And I was just talking to somebody earlier, and I suppose one of the bravest instances of whistleblowing was in relation to Dr. Neary and the hospital and the operations that were carried out on so many of those women, losing them the chance in many cases to have even one child or to have further children. And it was noted at the time that I think it was 2 midwives who blew the whistle, that they were from outside the jurisdiction, as if they had that sort of cultural disengagement from what was going on there. So you have that cultural reluctance, and it also just reminds me, it isn't a case of whistleblowing, but remember there was a case there a couple of years ago of a woman who had been raped, and there was a conviction against an individual, and yet there was this whole. Many people in the village were very, very, very hostile towards her, if you recall that. And that was like something out of a very old John B. Keane novel or play or something. And it just, even though this was like 2008, 9, whatever it was, you still got that sense of that culture there. I work in part of the SIPOC, the Standards and Public Office Commission, and as I referenced in my few words there, we have been trying to get various changes across the line in order to make that do what it says on the tin. And we have had very relatively few complaints over the years, and over a period when, as we're now discovering, there was quite a lot of wrongdoing taking place. And it would seem that our commission, because of the law underpinning it, wasn't able to quite match what was actually going on. And again, to pick up the point that you made about that. When a lot of the wrongdoing in the banks and elsewhere within the wider construction industry and so on was picked up, and I suppose rather crudely we thought, well, we watched what was happening in the US and thought that can happen here, and then we start looking for the legislation to match what had happened, and we couldn't find it. And culture comprises many things, but the law is a very important part of that. But the people who can change the law are the politicians, and it's over to them.
Just a note here. I remember some time back at an event hosted by a group of public relations consultants. I posed the question to someone from a bank: do we need more regulation? And this was about 7 years ago, and I distinctly remember not being invited back for a glass of wine afterwards. And the answer I got was, well, we need better regulation. We don't necessarily need more regulation. I fear the response of some people in both, particularly in government, who might listen to those who would counsel against more legislation, because legislation, in many respects, new legislation, is badly needed. Had we had legislation enacting the third directive, money laundering, we may have had seen money laundering tackled with greater vigour in the past, or EU directives on reinsurance, for example. We may have seen scandals that emerged in the Irish Financial Services Centre dealt with a lot more quickly. Likewise, we need whistleblower legislation. We need new legislation that will promote the sharing of official information in a proactive way. So I'm not sure whether legislation is necessarily a barrier. In many respects, I think we actually need more legislation, but it needs to be the right legislation too. I'm getting, Dave is doing this to me. I don't know whether he wants me dead or he wants us to wrap up. We'll take two more questions, and then we'll finish. Sorry, one at the back, and then.
No. I wanted to ask you if you are trying to provide this service for people with hearing difficulties, sign language, for example, if you are trying in the future, maybe in 1 or 2 years' time, to provide in different languages. And my third question for you is that is there kind of a need for a code of ethics in terms of for people to explain? I mean, I work in the area of translation, and when I work, I have to, suppose, commit or sign to this type of code of ethics. How are you going to implement this? Because I understand that confidentiality, but obviously it's a bit broader, not only confidentiality. I suppose there are other issues to deal with. And talking about code of ethics for volunteers and for people, both for users and for volunteers.
Yeah, we have our own internal code of ethics, and we have a charter that was up on the website a moment ago that people can read. And if anyone has a complaint about the service and is not dealt with adequately, they can report externally to our colleagues in the Secretariat in Berlin, which oversees the governance of the individual chapters, or alternatively outside if they don't get if they don't enjoy any, don't see any action taken on foot of a complaint. I'd love to be able to offer multilingual services. I can barely speak English as it is, but the service will develop. If we make it over the next 12 months or so, I'd like to see it expand. We will be delivering guides for the public and helping people with either language difficulties or people who are deaf as well. Noel, we'll take the Noel Miller final question before we grab a glass of wine if you want to stay behind.
First of all, congratulations to yourself and the team on the launch of the Speak Up service. It's great to see it. I think how I would see the system is at the moment we have a system that's broken in numerous places along the line, so to speak. I think the Speak Up service is hugely important in fixing an earlier phase of the system. From my own personal experience, though, I see the system to be broken in a number of places and further down the line. First of all, as has been clearly said tonight, we don't have any whistleblowing protection legislation, so individual employees are immediately exposed right there and then once they begin to speak up in any shape or form. So that has to be addressed. And then again, further down the line again, after an individual employee speaks up, and as is the history in Ireland, they're traditionally fired, they face into another part of the broken system, is that where they attempt to seek redress, either in the legal system or through the industrial relations machinery, have an inordinate long time to wait before they get access to the courts or to the Employment Appeals Tribunal. And as an example, now the Employment Appeals Tribunal, there's a massive backlog of cases. So if one is brave enough to go through the phase of speaking to yourself, then speaking out, gets fired, then they have another injustice while they wait 2 years unemployed or looking for another job. So I'm just interested to know, does Transparency International have a policy of trying to address, clearly you're addressing this part by launching the Speak Up service, clearly you're advocating very strongly for whistleblowing legislation, that's a key reason for your existence, but then further down the line, does Transparency International engage in trying to improve the system after someone has been fired so they don't have to wait for 2 years or whatever, etc.
Yeah, no, you pointed to a big problem that many people face for many different reasons who've been unfairly dismissed. The length of time that it takes from the time they're dismissed to the time they get a hearing at the Employment Appeals Tribunal or the Rights Commissioners. It's part of a problem, much wider problem that we will address through our campaigns, and we'll be much better able to campaign with the evidence that we collect from the service than we would if we were just reading legislation or reading the newspaper. I think it's important as well to bear in mind that many people go into or find themselves in a situation, a very difficult situation, confronted with a dilemma and have no one to turn to before they report. And we'd like to help people stop or prevent them making the mistakes they often make before they find themselves in facing a disciplinary tribunal or worse. So this is part of a holistic approach we're taking. We've been campaigning, we're researching, we've undertaken national integrity assessments. There are free copies there on the table that look at the political system and the legal system in its entirety. What this service will do will also inform the information or the data we've collected from desk research, from academic research and interviews, and campaign much more forcefully for the kind of reform we need to see to address the kind of lacunae you just talked about there. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to wrap up there. I'm going to invite you for a glass of wine. Thanks again to Emily O'Reilly, Bob Semple, the Minister in his absence. I'd like to thank as well, just before we move, I'd like to thank everyone who's involved in this event. Jane Dundon, who organised the meeting tonight, Sarah Jane Barrett. I know I'm going to forget a lot of people, volunteers, Anya, Leanne are over there, Nicole. I'm not sure who else I should be thanking, but and Clarissa at the back, who worked with us on the communications. But last but not least, Dave Dunn, who's built this system with us and has been pulling late nights for the last God knows how long. I'd like to thank him, and I'd like to thank you again for joining us tonight. Thank you.